Good morning, everybody. My name is Philip Rizzo, and I'm with Oracle, and I support and manage the construction and engineering product portfolio for Oracle's suite of products. One of the things that in the Southeast region that we've been seeing is just a remarkable expansion of growth and in all areas, from infrastructure to facilities, businesses moving in. And it's really caused a lot of excitement in terms of how things are overall being looked at, and the region growing in and of itself creates a lot of interesting infusion of capital if you look at it from companies coming in and managing overall infrastructure expansion. But it also creates a lot of challenges too in terms of how things are managed and how the fundamentals are being handled and moving forward, so that as infrastructure expands and grows, as Dan alluded to in his previous discussion, that you still maintain the core and the spirit of the community while expanding and growing at the same time. And so with me today, we've got Dr. Melva Black, who is the Deputy Director of Metro Public Health Department for Nashville and Davidson County. And also with us as well is Jamie Height, and he's the Director of Government Affairs for Tennessee Housing Development Authority. And so what we're going to talk today about, we've got a couple of questions we're going to be asking both Melva and Jeremy, and we're going to be walking through some of how their perspective in terms of how they're handling this infusion of infrastructure and infusion of investment in the community, and how they can handle that and better maintain and manage the growth overall. So with that, I'm going to jump over to the chair here. Hopefully our microphones are all working here, and if not, I'll just step back up. So go ahead. Testing working? Are you guys alive?
Testing, yeah.
Testing.
Hello, hello, hello? You hear me? Okay. Used to be in a rock band. Okay, so Melva, we'll start with you. One of the areas that you're focusing on specifically is in the housing area overall, in the housing crisis, and more specifically around affordable housing. Can you just give us a sort of an insight about your lens on the investment overall in the community, but the challenges and things that you face as well?
Yeah, thank you. I don't know that I've ever heard my voice as amplified, but thank you. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning, everyone. I know it's early for me too. Well, thank you, and thank you for the question. I, as a public health practitioner, sometimes it's odd, I think, for people to really think about the correlation between public health and housing. And maybe not for people in the room, but certainly as we are engaging people around the community, and sometimes even around the nation when we start talking about housing or a lack thereof, we often are trying to help people make the connection between the two. Having said that, from a public health perspective, we are often in conversation with persons in that particular sector, that housing sector, because we want to look at areas, particularly those that are communities where we have high rates of poverty, high rates of people who are renting, high rates of substandard housing, high rates of pockets where there are people who have lack of transportation, infrastructures that are not built because they have direct correlation to health and well-being. Why is that? It is because we know that when we look at the data often tells us people who are living in unattainable housing areas, substandard housing areas, often have high rates of obesity, diabetes. There are high crime areas. They impact mental health. I was looking at some data most recently that was published from our Metro Social Services Agency, and they shared with us that Blacks have a 39% rate of attaining housing, and I mean home ownership, versus 60% for whites. Why is that important to us as public health professionals? Because we know if there are people that are living in overcrowded areas, again, people who are living in high rent areas, people who are living in substandard areas, that we see the greater percentage of those persons who need some type of social service. And for us, it allows us to do projection planning and look at ways that we can build out responses and infrastructures from a public health perspective that allow us to prevent people from getting to stages of health conditions that are far more severe and critical. So for us, it's important for us to look at housing, housing access, because it helps us on the planning side to put more preventive measures in place and to really think about, from a fiscal perspective, what that looks like from a federal, state, and local ask, because we then are in need of dollars to help us provide those services for not only our department, but for the community.
Thank you, Melva. Appreciate that. And one thing I was going to ask Jeremy this next question. So last night I had a chance to walk around downtown a little bit and been here a few times, and I've seen how it's just changing. And from a housing perspective, you've got an interesting mix of high rises for business and also living and urban living as well. So what in your role, I mean, when you in your day-to-day work, what is the largest hurdle that you see in terms of how to balance that, but also just hurdles in general overall with the infrastructure needed to support housing?
I think my answer is going to dovetail very nicely into what Melva was talking about. Funding is probably the biggest obstacle, obviously. But more important is vision, I think, from the community. Dan mentioned it, you've mentioned it, being here in downtown and seeing how much has changed. When I first came to Nashville in 1999, there was nothing in the Gulch except for maybe the Station Inn, and there was no other reason to be down here unless you were in maybe some of the business-oriented urban, not really nice places to work. I mean, it was just storage and warehouses. The first residential building built in the Gulch was a tax credit property that we invested in through our low-income housing tax credit program. Why that's important, it provides a subsidy that stays with that property for the life of that property for 30 years. So when you look at Nashville, where the rents in the median are close to $2,000 a month, those rents in that building are closer to $700. So that makes a huge difference, and it's for the people who are working here in this community, the people who are doctors, the people who are nurses, firefighters, policemen, a single mother who's working for a service industry business here in Nashville. So if we don't have housing for them, we don't have anywhere for them to stay, and that's pushing them out of Nashville, which is putting a lot of pressure on most of our other communities. So when I say vision, what I'm talking about is Nashville looked at the Gulch and said 20 years ago, this is where the development's going to happen. This is what we want to see. A lot of communities have to do that. They have to look at what they can do to change things, whether that's putting in incentives. Our General Assembly this year passed a bill that will allow local communities to include voluntary incentives for people to build what the community wants. That's a huge, huge lever for the communities to have. But every one of them is going to have to address what their needs are and look and say, what do we want to see here and what incentives are we going to offer to make it happen? And that's really where the next step is. When I talk about funding, though, one of the things I'd love to see is some of the federal funding that we get match some of the economic development funding that we've seen. For example, in West Tennessee, we have the $11 billion Ford Blue Oval project in West Tennessee at the mega site. That is a tremendous economic gain for the state, but it comes with some serious challenges for the communities around that site. They're expecting somewhere in the neighborhood of north of 10,000 new people to move into that community to work and be part of that community. They don't have the infrastructure to support that development. There's not enough sewer, water capacity for them to support that. Matter of fact, the fire station that's right outside the Blue Oval site doesn't even have a water line to it yet. So it's sitting there empty. Even though it's built, it can't operate and function. And we have the same problem when we try to put in multifamily developments. No builder, no developer is going to build a high-rise apartment complex if they are going to have to build their own sewer plant to go with it. So if the communities don't put together some packaging and work with the state and the federal government to find some incentives to put some of our economic development money or some other funding sources to those infrastructure needs, you can't get the development from here, because you can't do it. If you've got a water system that has 200 people as your customer base, you can't build it to 10,000, because the cost will be assessed to those 200, and they probably don't want their water bill to jump by 500 times. So there's got to be some ways to structure that growth and put some funding in there that will help them reach those goals that we know we have to meet because of the expected growth we're going to see, but we have to do it in a smart way.
In a very smart way. So it's a multi-phased or three-dimensional challenge, if you will. So, so Melva, thinking more broadly, as things progress in terms of buildings, infrastructure, housing, how do you balance the overall community approach to it? And I'm kind of thinking the combination of so it's not just all dense living, but green spaces included and things of that nature. Can you touch on that a little bit?
Yeah, thank you. I was thinking about something, though, that Jeremy said, just about the transformation of the Gulch, right? I'm a native Nashvilleian, and I was listening to the gentleman that opened the conference, and just thinking about the transformation, the shifting, the change that has occurred in this city. Venture to say that many of you in this room have also experienced something similar in your own community. Am I right? That you are starting to see this shifting. And maybe you've even been a part of making some of that shift and change happen. And sometimes that feels good to locals, and sometimes it doesn't, because you can recall, oh, I remember when, in fact, I was driving with my mother over here this morning, who kind of drove me here this morning, but needless to say, she was recalling a department store that was on a street just 3 streets over from where we are. And she took me there as a child, but now it has been transformed into this multi-purpose building, and the whole scene has changed in the area, right? So some would argue that that's a growth change for the city, that it's good for development, good for the economic growth of the city. And then there are others on the opposite side of the coin that would say, wait a minute, this change is not good. It's moving people out, pushing people who once had opportunity, access to this resource, they no longer have it. But what is there is a beautiful new green space. And that green space that was not there previously in my childhood now is offering an opportunity for new residents to have access to a park that offers them space for exercise, opportunity to get out into good, hopefully clean air, and a place for them to commune and have social interaction. So for us as public health professionals, we look at those things. Where are there built environment, green and blue spaces for individuals, families to have access to a resource that's outside of their living space that gives them the interaction, gives them, because that's good for our own mental health, even mind, body, spirit, also gives families and individuals an opportunity to have exercising space, gives them an opportunity to have space to build relationships and networks that they may not have if they just stay within their own family unit or just within the confines of a restricted community. And what I mean by that is on their street, or just the house over, or just in a particular space where they only see themselves connected. So it gets them outside of that and gives them an opportunity to have a space that hopefully is free of any barriers for them to have the opportunity to engage where they may not have otherwise.
All right, thank you, appreciate that. It's a good answer. You had touched on, Jeremy, you had touched on earlier about some of the challenges when you're building out communities, and like the example of a fire station with no water at it. What give us some examples, I guess, or where have you seen things done right? And how do you replicate that for future growth?
I can point to a couple of our cities here in Tennessee that have done what I think is a great first step. Knoxville has adopted a comprehensive land use and zoning plan. Chattanooga just voted for that this past week. I think the city here in Nashville is focused on transportation as a way to unlock some of the potential for their housing to be better for the community. There's a lot of smart development going on. In particular, we've seen leveraging of multiple tools to accomplish a goal. For example, THDA pledged to use our tax credits in Chattanooga and in Knoxville and in Memphis for a federal grant, which just this week, Chattanooga was awarded a $50 million Choice Neighborhoods Initiative grant, which will let them redevelop an industrial sector of their city. I know we're not the deciding point on that, but our commitment to that city is I think what brings that kind of grant opportunity to the city, just because they know that if the feds are going to leverage that in, the state is also going to be there as a partner and leverage it. And that, again, shows the city's commitment to doing things. So if you can layer in those funding sources, those programs, but again, that takes a tremendous amount of work on the front end. You have to have a good vision. You have to get buy-in from all the other partners across multiple sectors of government and the private sector and the community. And that is a lot of work. But if you've got the vision for what you want to see achieved, it's possible to do that. In Memphis, it's made a huge difference. They've replaced what used to be a public housing project called Foot Homes. That has completely been redone. We just celebrated the 5th phase of that development in June with a ribbon cutting, and you would not believe the transformation that has made in the community. Knoxville is in the middle of doing that with some of their public housing to make it more bring it up to the standards of what the community expects their housing to be and the community they want to see and live in. So that's a tremendous thing, and it's great to see Chattanooga taking those steps as well. So, and I think every community across our state is facing housing pressure. As we talked about, we have a tremendous amount of people moving into this state every day. Nashville's seeing it. All of our surrounding donut counties around the metro Nashville are seeing it. And that pressure is pushing people out into communities that haven't thought about housing. We have a community that a developer came in and said, I'm going to build a 700 home development in the city. That doesn't sound like a lot, but they only had 700 homes in that community prior to that. So you're going to double the size of that city. That's a huge change. And as Melba said, that's something that people have to get behind, or you're going to face a tremendous amount of resistance. So it's nice to see people thinking forward on those things and making sure that they're planning and bringing the community along with that discussion. Because if you don't plan for growth, it just happens. And then you don't get what you want.
Yeah, and then you run into those challenges as well, where it's use the example of the fire station and no water. You double the size of community. You're putting a lot of pressure on the infrastructure in general. So,
may I add to that?
Sure.
The public health department depends on, or we lean heavily on 2 particular community assessments. One is called the Community Health Improvement Plan. We refer to it as by its acronym CHIP, and the other is the Community Health Assessment. We refer to it as the CHA. So the CHIP and the CHA. They are 2 independent assessments that include public health practitioners as well as community members in cohorts that help look at data that then drive strategies over a 3-year period with 3 primary focus areas. And they do a broad sweep of what's happening in this city. That then tells us, as public health practitioners, what we need to focus on, not only from a local level, but how we are thinking about policy. Because we also help to, I'm hopeful that we help to influence housing policy that will then help us look at how we can put in preventive measures so that people have an opportunity at longer, healthier lives. So the CHIP and CHA are really critical to the work that we do because we involve community in helping to drive the data that then helps us drive planning and projection planning so that we can put not only fiscal notes to it, but also how we can really think about how we're programmatically and being community engaged. Let me give you an example. So after the pandemic, what we saw was this elevation of mental health needs across communities, not just Nashville. This is both national and international. So the Chip and the Chaw told us that we have a gross need for these services in our community. We got $3.1 million from the local government to help us not only address mental health, but mental health as it pertained to high crime areas, low income, more impoverished areas that were experiencing substandard housing. So now we have in community mental health practitioners that are available free to the city. So persons have an opportunity to not only get mind, body, and spirit right, but they aligned, but they have an opportunity to really have a better shot at having a longer, more sustainable, healthier life.
Okay, thank you. And to touch on that a little bit more, I pulled together some facts, some figures here. In 2021, the infrastructure spending bill was passed, and that was about 1.2 trillion. Correct me if my math's wrong on that, but about 1.2 trillion earmarked towards infrastructure projects. And then of that, about 108 billion of that was, specifically towards transit. And so to try to touch on a little bit more and expand on what you're talking about there, how has that trickled down, or how does that factor into infrastructure for public health to get better access to healthcare across the broader and expanding communities? And that would be for you, Melba.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. So we have a mayor that has been in office not quite a year, Mayor Freddie O'Connell. Prior to him winning his office, he started promoting this 3-point plan. And now it's fully in motion, right? And it's called How Nashville Moves, How Nashville Grows, and How Nashville grows, moves, and something else. Just forgot it. Having a junior moment. So, but how Nashville moves is ultimately connected to building out transportation and access to transportation in the city. So it's back to the built environment, right? It's really looking at how we are improving sidewalk access, how we are building our local bus transportation is called WeGo, and how we're building out access to WeGo, and WeGo operating 24/7. Listen, that's huge for a city of this size. Nashville has reported about 100 new residents moving into the city on a daily basis. 100 new people making Nashville home every day. That's really big. And it's sizable in terms of what we need in transportation. So a 24/7 operation is big because what it means for those communities that have a lack of access to resource is now we can have a shot at equity, that we have people living in community that traditionally have not had access or a way to employment, a way to health centers, a way to other communities to engage in social networks. That's really big. Never mind that you may see at 2 a.m. in the morning one person on a bus. We've just been in had that conversation, because it doesn't necessarily equate to fiscal irresponsibility. It may mean that person is connecting to a route that has 20 or 30 or 50 people on the bus that's getting to another destination. So I think the city is starting to employ and really think about access to resources in a way that we have not in times past, and really looking at how this city is building out and up and what needs we have for a city in terms of transportation. So it involved a whole breadth of community conversations, that kind of touring around the city to check the pulse of what the needs are of the community, and that happens to be one of the areas that the mayor is focused on. And again, from a public health perspective, we really champion, because we know that not only equity is important for us as it pertains to the access to resource, but what it means in terms of health and health care is magnanimous, because it gives people, again, another opportunity to have access to a resource that impacts their own health conditions.
Thank you. And then final question here for Jeremy is, we today, and again, thank you both for being on the panel today, appreciate it. But Jeremy, can you talk a little bit more about the expanded resources at Tennessee Housing Authority, Development Authority, and how that impacts the community?
Yeah, I think one of the mentions right at the beginning was funding was one of the big fundamental things that we need more of. Right now, there is a bill in Congress, the Affordable Housing Credit Improvement Act. It's widely supported by our membership in the Congress. Our lead co-sponsor of that bill in the Senate is Senator Marsha Blackburn from Tennessee. We have the majority of our House delegates on that, and it passed out of the House in part of the tax bill earlier this year with 457 votes in favor of it. It's the most bipartisan bill in the Congress at this point, and it's aimed at giving us more resources to build more housing. It's stalled in the Senate. We hope that will resolve itself sometime this year, but if not, we'll bring that back. But it makes a huge difference for us. This credit is what gives us a tool to incentivize the private sector to build housing that's affordable for workers in the state. Without it, we don't build it. It's just not happening. There's plenty of apartments that are built here for the people who can afford it at market rate, but it's not for the people who work here. And if we don't have places for people to live that need to work here in the city, we won't have them. They're not going to be able to afford to live somewhere else and then absorb the transportation costs that it requires to get here. What we did in one of our studies was found that by trading distance for housing cost, you're actually not saving any money. It doesn't cost you less to move further away from the city. What it does is it trades housing cost for transportation costs. So it's a net loss for you as far as moving further away. You're just trading more time of your life in traffic.
Got it.
So.
Yeah. Makes sense. Well, thank you both for taking the time today to, again, be on the panel and speak to the larger audience here. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good conference.